Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Coffaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Well, welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insight podcast. I'm Dave Coffaro and glad to have you here with us today. I know that you know that the Greater Irvine Chamber is part of a much larger network associated with the United States Chamber of Commerce, but a little bit of history here. I think it's super interesting. So the idea of a national institution to represent the interests of American businesses came into being with President William Howard Taft, and he sent a message to Congress on December 7th, 1911, about the need for this central organization to be in touch with chambers of commerce throughout the country and keep the interests in closer touch with the different phases of commercial affairs. So that's going way back. But over time, this organization has become the world's largest business federation. I think that's amazing. The United States Chamber of Commerce is the largest business federation on the planet, representing the interests of more than 3 million businesses, all kinds, shapes, and sizes, all regions, as well as every state and every local chamber and industry association. So, with that backdrop about the U.S. Chamber, it's my privilege today to be able to introduce our guest, who is Jennings Imel, Vice President of the Western Region of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Jennings, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Glad to be here. Thank you for that introduction of the background as well on the U.S. Chamber. And you're right. And in fact, if you go to our building in D.C., which is right across the street from the White House, in the lobby, we've got a massive plaque on the wall that commemorates all of the chambers across really all the states and multiple communities that came together and pooled funds to actually create the U.S. Chamber of Commerce back in 1812. So appreciate you giving that background. Pretty cool.
Very cool. Very impressive. So before we get into the topic of today's podcast, would you share a little bit about your background and your role with the U.S. Chamber, Jennings?
Sure. So I've been with the U.S. Chamber now for 11 years. I run our Western Regional Office, which is in Southern California. In that role, I cover 5 states: California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii, working with chambers of commerce and other business associations in those 5 states, as well as the congressional delegation. So Republicans, Democrats, in terms of the House and Senate from those 5 states, and kind of making sure that we are advancing the U.S. Chamber's policy agenda in Washington, D.C. Of course, we advocate at the federal level to Congress and to the administration. But what really makes us effective and more effective than a lot of other organizations, quite frankly, is the fact that we have boots on the ground in the states that work with chambers and businesses that are in the districts, in states. And so we could really kind of coordinate our voice to make sure that members of Congress aren't just hearing from us in Washington, D.C., but that they're also hearing those same messages from businesses and chambers back home. And that's what really makes this so effective. And that's what I've been doing for the last 11 years and love doing it.
You are part of our voice at the federal level, and that is huge. So maybe if you would talk a little bit about the U.S. Chamber's top advocacy priorities for businesses going into the new year, and how are these priorities sort of shaped by the current economic and political landscape? Because we know that's a dynamic environment.
Yep, absolutely. So there are a number of issues that we're going to be working on in 2025. It's a big year. We've got a new administration coming into town. We've got a new Congress. The Senate is flipped now to Republican control. It's going to be unified control for Republicans with the House, Senate, and White House. Although on the House side, it's barely going to be a Republican control, 220 to 215. And as a matter of fact, it's going to be 217 to 215 because we've got a few folks that are leaving, 2 of them going into the administration, one of them's resigned to seat. So it's going to be a raise within majority in the House side, but we see opportunities for the business community to get some wins on the board in 2025. Right off the bat, the number one priority is going to be tax. It's going to dominate the policy discussion because most of the provisions of the 2017 tax reform bill are set to expire at the end of 2025. It's $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts. So essentially, if Congress does nothing this year or this upcoming year, businesses and Americans across the country will be faced with a $4.5 trillion hike. So that is priority number one. We've got to renew most of those tax provisions, make sure that we're getting pro-growth tax policy in place and that businesses are not going to be hit with this massive tax hike. That's going to be the big issue. Other than that, there are a lot of other topics, regulatory reform. There's going to be an immediate push from the administration and from Congress to roll back regulations from the Biden administration. We are going to be heavily engaged in those discussions. Altogether, over the last 4 years, we saw about $1.3 trillion worth of rules and regulations from the Biden administration. In fact, there's the costliest set of rules and regulations that we've ever seen from an administration. So there's going to be a lot of work immediately there in 2025. And of course, immigration, trade, there's a lot of discussion on tariffs. What's going to happen with tariffs with this incoming administration? We know kind of President Trump has been outspoken with various ideas on tariffs, energy policy. All of those things are going to be front and center in 2025. But I think tax for us is going to be the number one issue by far.
Yeah. So you have a huge territory. You described the Western region, and that is just a lot of terrain to cover, a lot of different businesses. You've got interaction with the business community. From your view, what are the most pressing challenges that are facing small businesses today, and how is the chamber, the U.S. Chamber, working to tackle these things at a national level?
Yep. Cost of doing business, that's the number one issue. And that's been the number one issue we've heard for a number of years now, obviously, with inflation. And inflation, even though it's gone down, it still continues to be stubborn. It's still right around, I think it's about 2.7%, the latest figure. And so that continues to be an issue. The cost of doing business is a major problem that businesses are facing. Workforce issues, the inability to find workers, the inability to keep workers, to find the kind of workers that businesses need. Those are two massive issues. Retail crime is another one that's kind of more specific to certain areas of the country, especially in California. That's been a big one. And I think that we've all heard about it in California. And I think the voters sent a pretty strong signal, Sacramento with Prop 36, that folks have been fed up with that. But those are really kind of the top three issues I think that we hear about the most from businesses. And when you talk about cost of doing business, that's why we're focused on things like tax. We need to make sure we avoid a massive tax increase when businesses are struggling with the cost of doing business. Same thing. Obviously, that's why we're going to be focused on the tariff discussion. We're going to be very focused on things like permitting reform, regulatory reform, right? I talked about the cost of regulations and rules of the previous administration. Of course, that adds to the cost of doing business. Permitting reform, right? Getting big infrastructure projects built, getting access to energy and making sure that we are boosting energy production here in the United States and transmission as well of electricity, all of those things. And you see it in the state of California where cost of energy, cost of electricity, it's far greater, far higher than just about every other state in the country. We need to make sure that we're making progress in some of those areas of regulatory reform and permitting reform so we can get projects built in a timely manner and not have money essentially wasted as we're waiting for these projects to be built. So that's informing all these challenges that we're hearing from small businesses. That absolutely informs ultimately the policy priorities that we're adding and that we're going to take in 2025.
I am absolutely certain, Jennings, that our audience is thrilled to hear you talk about permitting reform, cost of doing business, time to completion, how long it takes to get something done. I had a conversation with a dentist who just opened a practice here, and he was telling me about how long it took. So this is local level, but there were some other things beyond local and how long it took him and the cost of delay, how much it actually cost him in foregone revenue and so forth. So I'm certain that our audience cares a lot about that. Local businesses a lot of times feel disconnected from national policy decisions. We hear that all the time. People will say, I don't know that anybody even understands what it's like running a business, in Orange County and Irvine and so forth. So what steps is the chamber taking to ensure that the voices of small business owners are being heard and represented in Washington?
Yeah, well, you're right about not having enough elected officials seemingly with the understanding of business or business background themselves. I mean, obviously, we want to see more of that. Difficult to do, a lot easier said than done to get those kind of folks in the office. But certainly there is an appetite for the small business perspective. Elected officials at all levels, whether they're local or in Sacramento or Washington, D.C., they want to hear from business owners. They want to hear from people that are signing in front of paychecks, that are employing individuals, that are producing things in their communities, really making their communities work. And because it's a voice, quite frankly, of reason. And I think that elected officials, and we see this dynamic, especially in Washington, D.C., are pulled to both ideological extremes. There are a lot of incentives to go to the far right, to the far left. There aren't that many incentives to come to the middle. Um, and I think that the business community plays an important role there. And I think that genuinely, a lot of members of Congress are really thirsting for the common sense, business perspective on issues. And the U.S. Chamber, the best way that we get small businesses engaged, we have a small business council that consists of a number of small businesses across all 50 states that are engaged in these discussions. We'll invite them to testify on the Hill on different issues that are coming up. But really, the best way that we engage small businesses is through our partnership with local chambers. Constantly providing you all with the resources necessary to help engage your small businesses. Of course, we'd love to let you know what's happening in Washington, D.C., so that you can disseminate that to your small businesses. And we always encourage small businesses to get more engaged with their chamber, right? To attend events, to get involved with your government affairs committee or public policy committee, whatever it happens to be. Get on those email newsletters. Make sure that you're keeping yourself informed and abreast of what's happening, and put in the effort to go to these things, because that's going to, help make you aware of what's going on in Sacramento, what's going on in DC. But it also gives those small businesses an opportunity to actually meet elected officials or to meet staff for elected officials, because those folks go to those meetings, and you need to develop those relationships, and don't be scared to develop them. Don't be scared to get their card, get their information, their phone number, and reach out. If you've got an issue that's impacting your business, whether it's on the permitting side or the tax issue, whatever it happens to be, don't be afraid to reach out, because that's the job of the elected official. That's certainly the job of their staff, of their district staff. They want that input, and they're going to be responsive. And you all have a great opportunity at federal level. You've got a freshman member of Congress coming in, Dave Min, and that's exactly the time to establish a relationship with an elected official when they're brand new. They're eager to hear from you. They want to hear from business owners. What's impacting you day to day? What are your major concerns? They're thirsty for that information. So please go out, make the effort, go to a couple of committee meetings, get involved with your chamber, make those connections, and reach out, because it really does pay off in the end.
It does. Advocacy is such an important part of what a local chamber does in harmony with the U.S. Chamber. And you mentioned Dave Min, and he has been very engaged with us. In fact, we've scheduled an initial getting to know you meeting with him coming up in January. So we're pleased about that as well. Just like we do with our local elected officials, we want to make sure that we're close and that we're hearing his priorities, he's hearing what the business community says and all of that. So I think that's really a good point on how everybody can have their voices heard. So would you share a little bit about how the US Chamber collaborates with local chambers to amplify the impact of small business advocacy? And maybe even there's an example of a successful partnership or an initiative you've been involved in that just sort of illustrates that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are always, we love working with local chambers. We love kind of having that dialogue both ways, making sure that we're kind of, keeping you informed of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and what issues are moving, and kind of where the touch points are, where we can kind of make some progress reaching out to certain members of Congress. And we love to hear that. And we love to hear feedback from local chambers as well. What issues you all are hearing about from your businesses, just having that open dialogue, and the fact that we're always willing to kind of to discuss these issues with government affairs committee and with your board. All of those things I think are really important. And I think when you think of coalition letters and stuff like that, that's a really important part of what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that small businesses and chambers and their voices being heard in Washington D.C. We had a very robust coalition letter program that we send. Whenever an issue comes up on the Hill, a big vote comes up on the Hill, we send those letters. And we love getting, 2, 3, 400 chambers from across the country sign on to those. The Greater Irvine Chamber has consistently been on a number of those letters. I mean, we had a big tax letter going back to the tax issue just a couple of months ago that we sent to the Hill, that kind of stressed the point that businesses don't want to see a massive tax increase. That Congress has to start thinking about this now. We sent that letter. We had about 500 chambers from across the country, including Greater Irvine Chamber. And that kind of stuff gets the attention of members of Congress. They pay attention to that sort of thing. We love doing issue roundtables. You mentioned the fact that you're going to have an event in January, kind of like a freshman forum type event with Congressman Dave Min coming in. We love doing that stuff. We had a number of events that we did. I mean, thinking of Orange County, just in the last several months. I mean, we did tax roundtable with former Congress, or soon to be former Congresswoman Michelle Steele, who was on Ways and Means Committee. We did retail crime events with Michelle Peel, with Young Kim, with Kevin Kiley up north in Sacramento area, that brought small businesses to the table to share their experiences of dealing with retail theft and how that was impacting them on a day-to-day basis, keeping customers away, problems with their employees, all those things. That's great. I mean, those things happen because of the relationship that we have with the local chamber. We work with the local chamber to put those things together, and the members of Congress really value that feedback that they get from those business owners, and that makes a big difference. And it does lead ultimately to win and to progress in Washington, D.C.
What I hear from that is there is a path to have your voice heard, and that's the connection through the local chamber with the U.S. chamber. I'll also mention for our listeners, if you're curious about it, take a look at our website, and our legislative handbook is right there. So you can see the types of positions that we'll take. And we focus on business related issues. So we're not getting involved in things that are outside of the business domain. But I encourage you to just take a look at our website and follow that link through. Take a quick look at the handbook. We have a policy committee that meets regularly, and we're talking about topics that are of interest to our members. So you do have a path to be heard. So Jennings, what tools or resources does the U.S. Chamber provide to help small business owners engage with policymakers and advocate for their interests beyond what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, our website's always a good place to start, uschamber.com. Go there. We've got a lot of resources there. We've got blog posts, all kinds of, you could search by issue area, all of that. We've got a small business website as well, uschamber.com/co, where you can find some details on, kind of issues that are specifically impacting small business and how small businesses can get engaged in that process. You've got a U.S. Chamber Action website, where we've got kind of form letters ready to go. Most recent example was on emergency supplemental funding for disaster relief, right, which has been a big issue with 2 back-to-back hurricanes in Florida, wildfire season in California, FEMA running out of money, that sort of thing, making sure that there's money in the pot to respond to natural disasters. We had a sign-on letter go out on that template letter ready to go that small businesses can get access to. All you have to do is input your information, your address, name, that sort of thing, press send, and then you get a letter out to your member of Congress. We've got that stuff, but I think really the most important thing is just the interaction with local chambers, because we work the most with you all, with you, Dave, Greater Irvine Chamber. That's where that connection is. And so if the businesses are investing in the local chamber, are engaged, going to your public policy committee, that sort of thing, that's where you're going to get the most value and be able to kind of learn about what's happening in DC and learn about how to get engaged.
Really, really helpful. So, the reality of being a business owner, a business leader is that you got a ton of stuff that you're juggling. Then there's the question of advocacy. So advocacy often requires staying informed about complex issues. What advice would you give to small business owners about keeping up with sort of the latest legislative updates and things that might impact their companies?
I think, again, I think it goes to being engaged with the local chamber, right? That's where you're going to be able to get it the most. Otherwise, small business owners, they don't have the time to go through sometimes all of our stuff with U.S. Chamber, or to, go and, I mean, I guess you could sign up to the newsletters, the political newsletter and Axios and, roll call on the Hill and get all their stuff. But most small businesses owners aren't going to have the time to just do that stuff in the morning. And so I think the best thing to do is just get engaged with your local chamber, try to make an effort to get to some government affairs committee and stuff like that. Sign on to the email lists at your local chamber. And yeah, if you can, sign on to our email list or to email it to some of those publications that I mentioned. Politico and stuff like that, which is really helpful. And there's a California Politico that keeps track of what's happening in Sacramento. I think that stuff's helpful, but really, I think the best thing you could do is get engaged with the local chamber because you, Dave, and local chambers, they get stuff from us, U.S. Chamber, they get stuff from Cal Chamber, and if you make an effort to go to those committee meetings and stuff, that's where you're going to get really the download of, hey, these are the issues going on in DC. These are the bills that are coming up in Sacramento. This is what you need to be aware of. I think that's kind of the best way to get engaged.
Yeah, and that's an important part of what we're here for. So, as we look ahead into the new year, are there economic trends that you look at that are likely to influence the chamber's advocacy efforts? And how should small businesses prepare for anything that you see as shifting or changing in the new year?
I think economic trends, the economy continues to be relatively strong here in the US. We are still a little bit concerned about inflation, and we knew that that was going to be sticky. It was going to take a long time to go down. So, interest rates are probably going to continue to be elevated. Mm, we anticipate that happening. The rest of the world economically, not as in great a shape as the US. We're seeing kind of a slowdown, particularly EU, other kind of developed nations, China, even not as much robust growth as what we've seen in previous decades. That's going to continue to be the case. But overall, things are relatively strong here. So we're just going to want to make sure that we kind of, like I said, keep costs down with inflation continuing to be a problem. That's why we're going to have to focus on tax issues, immigration issues, and that get to employment, workforce issues as well. That continues to be a problem. It's not as acute a problem as it was about a year or two ago when we had a massive mismatch in the number of job openings relative to people actually looking for work. At one point, the gap was 3 million, where there were 3 million more job openings than people looking for work. It's not that bad anymore, but we still have about a 500,000 more job openings than we have people actually looking for work. The labor pool is extremely tight. And that's going to continue to be the case in 2025, we think. So that means immigration is going to have to play a role. We're going to continue to fight for legal immigration reform. So that means making it easier for employers to be able to get the access to the kind of talent that they need. It also means that we're going to have to be focused on childcare issues, right? To make sure that we have enough childcare available and that employers can take advantage of tax credits and things like that. If they're providing childcare, that employees can get, pre-tax set aside to help, offset the costs for them for childcare. That's going to be a big issue. Second chance hiring for folks with, maybe criminal records. All those things are kind of going to be on the table when we're thinking about how to address our workforce crisis, because really the workforce issue, I think, if you look at the big picture demographics in the country, that's going to continue to be a challenge for employers in 2025 and well beyond. So that absolutely is going to inform a lot of the policy priorities that we have.
It's great to know though that the things that we hear from our members are the things that you're thinking about, focused on. I'm certain that our audience is going to say it's music to my ears hearing you hit on those topics. Those matter a lot. We've talked a lot about advocacy. Would you share a recent success story where small business advocacy just sort of came to the fore for the U.S. Chamber and it led to some type of a meaningful policy reform?
Sure. The thing that comes immediately to mind is a win that we had actually yesterday in the Senate. So, the chair of the National Labor Relations Board, Lauren McFerrin, was renominated to the NLRB, mm, and that vote came up in the Senate yesterday. It ultimately failed. And the reason why that's a big issue is that if she had been confirmed by the Senate, it would have cemented a 3-2 advantage uh, in the NLRB uh, for Democrats through 2026. But the Democrat Republican issue isn't really the issue here. The issue is that Lauren McFerrin has been um, very kind of vehemently, pro labor, anti employer, anti employee rights. Under her leadership, you've seen a lot of really controversial decisions at the NLRB over the last several years, including things like the joint employer standard, really kind of restrictions on employer free speech, card check, a lot of these kind of really bad things where essentially the NLRB has been working as an advocate for labor. Uh, NLRB is supposed to be a kind of a fair and neutral arbiter in labor disputes, not supposed to take either side. So making sure that she did not get reappointed to the NLRB is a big win for business. And that happened because of the local small business and chamber outreach that we saw from Arizona. The Arizona chamber community and Arizona businesses really got engaged in that discussion, reached out to Senator Sinema, and Senator Sinema and Manchin. Those were the two Democrat, or I guess former Democrat senators that voted no on Lauren McFerrin to NLRB. That's a massive win. It's the most important labor vote of the year. Huge win for the business community. But that doesn't happen, quite frankly, without local outreach. And in fact, I heard specifically from Senator Sinema's office herself that the outreach that they heard from chambers and businesses in Arizona was huge. And so that's just one example, very recent example, where it does make a difference. And I know that's an Arizona specific example, not California, but we've seen exactly that same dynamic play out in California as well.
A really good example. And I also like that you highlighted it's about policy, not about party. Right. So we want to support policies that are pro-business, regardless of whose they are. And we want to stand up against those that are anti-business. It just doesn't help our stakeholders, our constituency. So we're coming to the end of our conversation together, Jennings. If you could just share one piece of advice to small business owners that are listening today, how to make their voices heard and how to influence change, what would it be?
You've got to stay engaged. You've got to be engaged in these discussions. Join your local chamber, put in the effort. You get out of your membership what you're willing to put into it. So if you're willing to join the local chamber for however many $100, whatever it is a year, if you really want to get something out of that, you've got to put in the effort. Go to the event, get involved with the government affairs committee, make relationships with your elected officials and their staff. They want to hear from you. They value what you have to say, and keep that in mind. That at a time when institutions across the board are under attack, and faith and trust in institutions in America are seemingly on the decline across the board, small business is held in higher esteem than just about any other institution in America. Chambers, small business. I mean, you look at polls, 75% trust. I mean, this is higher than in some cases, and even the military, which has always kind of been historically number one. So you are a trusted source of information. Elected officials want to hear from you. They value what you have to say. Please keep that in mind. Please get engaged with your local chamber, and you can make a difference.
Fantastic, actionable advice. Jennings Imel, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Appreciate all that you do.
All right, folks, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.